Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. There will be more people joining us over the next few minutes, which is great. Always nice to see everybody. This is our second installment of 2023 for the Humanity and Healthcare series. We're looking forward to chatting with Brett in just a few moments. I'm Damon Dagnone, co-lead with Catherine Donnelly and other members of the team who are here, Hugh and Anne and Claire and Jennifer and Anne and others. And we're excited. So as we always do, we're going to start with a land acknowledgement that Queens is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. We are grateful to be able to live and come together and learn and enjoy each other's company and play on these lands. And in acknowledging the land that Queen's University is situated upon, it is important for us all to consider our positionality in relationship to the land. It is also important to pause and reflect on what reconciliation, decolonization, and indigenization look like for each of us. We have no specific conflicts of interest for this session. And as usual, I know it's been 3 years that we've been using Zoom and MS Teams and other things, but just a reminder, you can use the reactions button to raise your hand. You please go ahead and use the chat to ask questions or make comments. Cameras are encouraged, but understanding you might not want to have your camera on the whole time. And just everybody try to mute if you're not speaking. Before I introduce Brett, I'm going to remind everybody that we do have a workshop coming up in person, similar to the workshop that we had in February, highlighting our two spring speakers, Dr. Karen Schultz and Dr. Stephanie Nixon, who will continue the conversation on the topics that they've spoken to during the last two sessions. So that'll be at the Donald Gordon Center on Union Street, the morning of April 19th. The link is there, but if you search Humanity and Healthcare series in OPDES, you should be able to find the link, no problem. Any troubles, just email me at any time. So I'm very happy to welcome Brett Babcock, who is a quadriplegic marathon racer, Canadian record holder, just got a new job yesterday, congrats. Very excited, who is going to chat with us about quadriplegia beyond the medical model. And without further ado, Brett, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we go. And say welcome and ask you to introduce yourself to the group that's here, and we can start talking about your story.
Alrighty, well, thank you everyone for joining tonight. This is sort of my first discussion with a comprehensive team of healthcare professionals. It's my first time doing this, but I'm pretty casual when it comes to speaking events. I enjoy speaking. Sometimes I speak a little too much, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I'm someone who speaks off the cuff, so I might say a swear word or two. I'll try not to, but anyways, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Brett Babcock. I'm a Kingston native. I graduated from Kingston Collegiate and Vocational Institute when that still existed. I graduated from there in 2012. So I'm very familiar with Kingston. I actually was living there the last 3 years and recently moved to Ottawa this January. Some, I guess, other aspects about me beyond my disability. I obtained a degree in psychology and disability studies at Carleton University, and I recently just completed a certificate in rehabilitation services through Seneca College. My career aspirations are to go into vocational rehabilitation, so assisting people with disabilities, whether it's acquired or chronic illness, and returning to work, or sort of navigating long-term, short-term disability. But needless to say, I actually just was offered a permanent position out of the Ottawa Hospital with an organization that connects acute patients and family members to other people in the community with the same sort of conditions. So I start that in a couple of weeks, and specifically I'll be working within the spinal cord injury population. So that's me in a snapshot at this very moment. I come from a very supportive family, quite the medical background in my family as well. My dad is a GP. He practiced in Emerge in Trenton and Belleville. And I have a twin sister who is a physiotherapist at Providence Care Hospital, and an older sister who's also a physiotherapist. My original career aspirations were to become either a physio or an athletic therapist. The stars didn't align in that sense, but sort of that's my family background. I come from a very, very supportive family who helped me in my journey to healing. You know, having that medical background was very beneficial. Trying to think of what else here. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell before getting into sort of my diagnosis and what happened to me.
So Brett, thanks for that. You and I were chatting on Monday night, and you sort of walked me through a little bit of going out to university. It was first year university. Is that right? When you went out to Alberta?
Yep, I lasted 1 month, but I enrolled in physical health and education in the specialized sport performance program at the University of Alberta. Again, it didn't last for very long, but sort of that's the direction I was headed. Very, very focused on sports at that time. School wasn't necessarily a priority of mine. Phys ed sort of just fit my lifestyle, and you know, I really did enjoy the courses for the short amount of time. But yeah, I headed out to Edmonton, not only in pursuit of education, but also to refine my mastery of gymnastics. For those you don't know, I was on the Canadian national gymnastics team. I specialized in the sport of trampoline, and I endured a spinal cord injury, very traumatic, catastrophic injury 10 years ago, during a training accident. I don't really like to speak specifically to what happened to me. You know, whenever I'm interviewed, it's oftentimes that's sort of the fixation on, well, what happened to you? Or let's dig into that. But it's been 10 years, and I closed that chapter just far beyond that point in my life. But essentially, I had a training accident where I under-rotated a skill and landed on the back of my neck, and that resulted in a subluxation or dislocation of the C5-6 vertebrae. So I'm paralyzed from essentially mid chest line down, as well as in my fingers. I don't have any dexterity, as well as my arms are partially paralyzed. So my triceps don't function, but I do have pretty big biceps, which is how I propel my racing wheelchair. I have just enough mobility to be independent and to participate in sport, and that's something I don't take lightly. Initially, when I had my accident, I had absolutely no movement or sensation below essentially my neck, due to the spinal shock, and it's not necessarily a miracle, but I'm very lucky to have regained the mobility and sensation that I have, and I never take it for granted. So that's sort of always been my perspective on things, is to continue to maximize what I do have, because I do have it. It's easy to want more, but it's always important to remember where you came from and others who don't have the mobility that you have. But yeah, so I had my accident 10 years ago. So I've been around the block for a decade, which is hard to believe. Not necessarily when I see my beard, it's starting to gray when I grow it out. But yeah, that's sort of where I was before all of this happened. Solely focused on gymnastics. I wanted to refine, master my artistry, and you know, that didn't happen for me. And you know, the life had different planned for me, and I've sort of have always just gone with it. I knew the severity of my injury from the very moment it happened. I never lost consciousness. Needless to say, it was very scary and traumatic, but you know, I had a very comprehensive team of healthcare professionals. Ironically, the ER doctor who responded to me was one of my dad, who trained underneath my dad. But overall, my healthcare experience was very positive in Edmonton, as well as doing rehab in Lyndhurst and the rest through Providence Care. But yeah, so that's sort of the places I've been in terms of the medical side of things.
Thanks, Brett. Your title, which is sort of going beyond the medical model, I was hoping that maybe over the next 20 minutes or so, we could, or longer or less, kind of start where that medical model, that healthcare model started, where again, you described to me the other night, having a more passive role, I guess, in sort of recovery and the initial stages.
Mm-hmm.
And how that evolved over time to have much more agency and to, as you say, sort of go beyond the medical model. So I was hoping we could kind of sort of take that trajectory for the next little bit. And then as people feel comfortable to ask questions and or make comments, to do that in the chat or put their hands up.
Sure. Yeah, again, feel free to message at any point if you have any questions. I'm an open book. I'll answer anything. I've talked in front of children, university students, elderly patients. So there's probably nothing I haven't been asked. But yeah, so in terms of going into the medical model of disability, or I guess where it started for me was obviously becoming paralyzed was a very traumatic and scary event that happened to me. It was a living nightmare, going through the ICU. And through rehab, and really adjusting to my body, to a completely foreign body. So going from an elite athlete to all of a sudden having no function really below my chest. And, like medical professionals are aware that it's not just loss of mobility, but it's also neurogenic bladder, neurogenic bowel, which were like a surprise to me. After a couple of weeks, I wasn't even aware that I wasn't able to urinate or to defecate independently on my own. And that was a really scary thing for me, not being able to do these primitive functionings. And then also learning as a quadriplegic, I'd have no impaired autonomic nervous system. So an inability to sweat and to regulate my temperature. And it was honestly frightening, very frightening, not just being hooked up to all the machines and going through surgery. And, I had a halo at one point and wasn't able to swallow. But originally I just had such a medical gaze over my body because it was medicalized. I was relying on all these life supports. I was relying on nurses, doctors, allied healthcare professionals, physios, OTs. Everything about my life all of a sudden became medical, and it involved so many other people beyond myself that I wasn't used to. And that loss of independence was really scary. And for the longest time, my body didn't feel like mine. It felt like something I had to share with other people in order to survive. It didn't take very long for me to be comfortable being naked in front of people, even peers my age. Like I had nursing students around my age, and that was pretty degrading, having to be exposed like that, having people poking and prying at you. I remember when I first had the accident, they actually cut my gymnastics bodysuit off and touching all around, like, Brett, can you feel your penis? Can you feel your toe? Can you feel these things? And it's like, well, Christ, no, I can't. And you have 6 professionals just standing over and looking at your body. And, they don't, in that scenario, it's a medical emergency, but I just felt so removed as a human being. I just felt, I think the important thing is to put your place in the shoes of that person, because I felt so distant from everyone interacting with me. They were doing their jobs, but I just almost didn't feel human. And that sort of continued on for a little while. And I don't know, just the way you go into the hospital and through rehab and being discharged, you just take on a medical gaze of your body. And it took me a really long time to get over that. And I wasn't even aware that it was something I needed to overcome. It just came naturally. And I got to a point where I got sick and tired of it. Like I was learning to categorize myself, and I think as I became more and more independent, I was able to sort of partition that um, thought of myself, trying to sort of reclaim my identity as a person. And I was telling Damon earlier in a chat the other day that, when you have a catastrophic accident like this, there is no rebuilding that person you were. Like I'm never ever going to get back the person I was before. And I've come to terms with that. Um, I really had to establish a completely new person, new identity, new everything. Because my only identity before was gymnastics and sport and independence, and none of that was going to come back to me. So it wasn't even a matter of rebuilding myself, but having to establish a completely new person. And I had to develop new interests because, again, it's only gymnastics. And like I'm lucky that I tapped into school. It was more of a coping mechanism. But really branching out into psychology and disability studies is really what caught my attention and sort of enlightened me about the medical model and social model of disability. It's like, hey, you know what? My body's not necessarily the problem here. Yes, of course, my body does pose limitations and challenges on me. I'll never discredit those things, but for the most part, most of my challenges come from a society that's not built for quadriplegics. Because I can be 100% independent at home, don't need any help. But the second I leave my home, that's when I met with challenges where I can't be fully independent. But yeah, just being able to see, coming to terms with that and realizing I had to overcome this scary thought of my body being something so medical is sort of the challenge I faced. And I think probably one of the most proud things I've overcome. But yeah, like putting the human back in the body of a wheelchair user, I think it's very easy to assume or to think of people under a medical gaze when they're in a wheelchair, because it's easy to think about the challenges their bodies face. But for the most part, my life's not medical at all. Like I'm barely in the hospital, and I'm very lucky in that sense. I know a lot of quadriplegics can have issues with respiratory, bladder, bowel, skin. I've been very lucky to have been healthy the last 10 years. But like I really don't see myself from a medical place anymore. Perhaps with time, but I really try to make sure I distance myself from that. And so there's that. And I guess I'll talk about sort of gaining agency, if you had anything to lead into that, or do you want me to?
So, Brad, thanks for sharing all of that. It makes me wonder, along that journey, was it kind of a gradual, continual change, or did you have certain sort of aha moments where you kind of made these sort of bigger change or bigger realizations that you explicitly in your mind were trying to get away from that medical model, or that or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, I think I can't think back to like specific like pivotal moments. I think it was more of a continuous thing as I matured with age. I was only 18 at the time of my injury, so again, I was just an adolescent when I had the onset, and I think I just matured with age, as well as meeting other people. And I think it kind of just came naturally. I can't pinpoint a particular person who sort of drove me. I think it's just something that just I came by and sort of went with it. And I knew I had to grow in many aspects of my life, grow in terms of interest, identity, knowledge, education, and that's just one component. I think one of my biggest fears that held me back for years was my fear of falling out of my chair, and coming to realize that yes, if I fall, like it's not the end of the world. I'm going to get back up. Well, I won't. Someone will be lifting me back in my chair. Someone, maybe two people. When I got over the fear of falling, I fell many times going out in university, slightly intoxicated and not watching the curbsides. And I have many stories of falling, and I was able to, once I got over that fear, I was able to really improve my independence. So, taking control of my transfers and, not being too frightful of transferring on my own. Like, I remember bed to chair, chair to bed being such a challenging thing for me. And then fast forward 10 years, I'm transferring into my Mazda 5, and I have an arm that comes out and picks up my chair. So it's neat to see how much has changed. And, a decade's not too long in such little time, but, when you're able to overcome those fears, I was told that I wouldn't be able to transfer alone independently from my chair to bed. And, that's something I took with a grain of salt. I obviously respect medical professionals' opinions and advice. But I think, again, looking at the medical model, when you have something as specific as a spinal cord injury where you can target, oh, he's a C5, C6, this is what his functioning is going to be like. This is his mobility. These are his goals. This is what he'll be doing in the future. That's what was presented to me. And I appreciated that from the doctors and physios and OTs. But always wanting more for myself. And I like to describe, I'm not pessimistic, but I'm not overly optimistic. I don't believe in false optimism. I knew the severity of my injury. And even knowing that, I always wanted to make sure I maximized what I had. So I knew I was never going to walk again. I had to fake for my family and say, oh yeah, we'll keep fighting towards this walking again and whatnot. But for me, it was just, again, maximizing my arms so I can do these to gain as much functional independence as possible.
Yeah, Brett, I remember us, talking about being ambitious but realistic.
Yeah.
I think was kind of like just we spent some time chatting about that. Catherine's got a question in the chat there that I was going to read out to everyone. Oh, there she is. I'll let Catherine read her question out.
Brett, really appreciate your reflections on so many things, sort of this notion of transformation, and just really wanting your thoughts on a few things. Like, the medical model is so dominant in healthcare. We often don't even know the lens we're practicing in because we're just so immersed in it. So it's hard to articulate, I think, for some of the deeply medical more professions. Like, there's a continuum, I think. Do you think two questions? Do you think the medical model inherently removes the human from the care that's being provided? And like, how do we do a better job training health professionals?
Well, I think it comes with the territory. There is a need for the medical model, the rehabilitation model. I don't deny that. We need medical professionals to save us. Like 70 years ago, the life expectancy of a spinal cord injury survivor wasn't great. There was no talk of reintegration into community. I think the medical field has come a long way in helping people like me living a full, independent, healthy lifestyle. But I think, yeah, just the territory, it does naturally, I think it does remove the patient because, again, you're there to not quote unquote fix our bodies, but you're there to help us deal with these complications. And, that's sort of the center and forefront of what you're there to do. So I wouldn't say it necessarily is such a bad thing, but I think if you're able to be critically aware of the medical model and how you might be contributing to it, I think just being more aware of the lens you're practicing in is best. And I think always trying to, from a place of empathy, trying to put your place in the shoes of the patient you're treating. I think that's one of the best things you can do. And, talk to them. It doesn't always have to be medical talk. It could be, how's your day? Or, like, I see you have this, or I saw a picture of this. And just trying to bring that human aspect back to it. Even the family members, I noticed a lot of the time, my family sort of left out in the conversations, and I don't know, something as deeply traumatic as a spinal cord injury, you know, you need a distraction from it. And that can come from medical professionals as well. And just, I guess, being aware that life goes far beyond the hospital, from hospital bed to chair. You know, the psychosocial aspects of spinal cord injury afterwards is huge. It's profound. And, you know, a lot of the great advice I learned was from other spinal cord injury survivors, and sort of that importance as well. But yeah, I think it's inherently, it removes the person, but I think there's simple things that can be done to sort of fix that.
Thank you.
Brett and Scott, a question that's a really nice connection to where Catherine started there. Anne, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, hi Brett. Nice
Hi.
to meet you virtually. I'm an OT by background, but I'm retired and now I volunteer as a patient partner. So I'm really interested in your perspectives. And I'm keen to understand a little bit about this new position that you're going to, how your philosophy might shape the kinds of work you do with individuals who have spinal cord injury, but almost even more curious about whether you'll be working with the healthcare providers, the professionals, to help educate them based on your experience and your thoughts about disability.
Yep. So from what I understand so far, I'll be working with acute patients as well as patients who've been discharged into the community not too long ago. So the main component here is it's a peer program. So a peer program where we connect spinal cord injury survivors with individuals who have the same disability in the community. Also looking at different backgrounds, socioeconomic status, race, gender, sexuality. We're looking at all those things to create the right fit, so that they have a confidant to confide in the struggles that they're going through, because it can be a very lonely process. I know for me, I didn't want anything to do with disability. I didn't want to talk to someone in a wheelchair. You know, I didn't want this to be a part of my lifestyle. And it, you know, when I approach people, I volunteered for this organization for 10 years, and my approach is always coming to a person as if they already have a wall built around them, and sort of plugging away at that wall, trying to tear it down so that they're more comfortable, and, you know, approaching them from a heightened awareness of, you know, this is a living nightmare that they're going through, and trying to pull away those bricks so that they can confide and gain trust in you, and so that they can pour their energy out towards healing and recovery, rather than sort of keeping themselves in and not wanting to really be a part of the disability community. But yeah, so it's connecting patients to patients, family members to family members. And yeah, another component is working closely with the nurses, the medical professionals, the OTs. And, you know, like I'm someone, you know, when I did my interview, they asked me what my greatest strength was, and I said it was my charm, and they laughed. Like I'm a very talkative person. I can strike up a conversation with strangers. And yeah, I really look forward to sort of building that relationship with professionals, OTs and PTs, because they're people I feel comfortable around. Like I love when someone tells me they're an OT or they're a nurse or a PT. I just, there's something where I'm able to just be more authentic. Not that I'm not with other people, but I just feel more comfortable because they have a bit of an understanding of what my life looks like. But no, like I totally want to go in there and I guess show them what I'm doing, because I think when you think of a C5 quad, you don't picture someone transferring into a car and lifting their chair into their car, doing like I think it's an oxymoron to say like I'm a quadriplegic marathon racer. You know, like not every quadriplegic, you know, some it's full paralysis of the arms, but there are quite a few of us who have some mobility in our arms left. And, you know, just showing people that you can still maximize what you have, and that you're still able to do sport. Doesn't have to be sport. That's just something that's always been in my background, but you can drive again. I love driving. You can do all these things, and it goes way beyond just transferring to bed. But
I'm thrilled to hear about the peer support, because I think that's one of the important aspects of treatment for so many people and care. But I'm equally excited to hear that you will be collaborating with healthcare professionals and helping to educate them, because you're doing that here, but to do that as part of your job to me is a wonderful addition to the team.
Yep. Yeah, I'll be working with social workers too. Like things just become so natural for me. Like I'm familiar with disability tax credit, all those different aspects of my life, insurance claims, dealing with that the first time can be really tricky, but it's just something I do on autopilot. And, there is this very medical side of my life that it's routine. I get through it. My body is a part-time job, taking care of it. It's something that I've grown used to, but if you can show people I'm capable of all these things, you'll be capable of them as well. If you continue down this path, there is potential for improvement. I never tell anyone, no, you're not going to walk again, or, what do you have right now? How can you maximize it? And that's sort of the best philosophy in terms of going down that path. The peer support was massive for me. Once I finally gave in, and for some reason I thought if I gave into disability sport that somehow the universe would stop my healing, that like it'd be like, oh, he's accepted his fate, we're just gonna put the brakes on his healing. And you develop all these different just mindsets that are just so strange, but at the time I was young. But yeah, I think the great thing about peer support too is you get to go to people's homes and you can see how they've modified them. Like, it's really important for me to see other quadriplegics' vehicles and the hand controls they use, the different modifications they have to their chairs, or like not everyone can afford these fancy lavish homes that have the perfect accessible roll-on showers. And it's really important going to the community and seeing what other people have done to sort of navigate their lack of mobility. And that's a huge component as well, is oftentimes we're basically forced to buy medical products that we've never tested. Like, you don't really get to test a wheelchair, you don't get to test all these things, you just buy them off the shelf and you can't return them, and you're stuck with it for 6 years. So it's really important to see other people's equipment and to inform yourself of different components of a wheelchair. When I first was injured, I thought I'd just be picking the color of my wheelchair. I was that naive. And the second time around, I educated myself and I knew everything I wanted beforehand. And, that's when I took agency. When I'm getting products that don't necessarily fit me or weren't perfect, I took the ownership of that. I made this mistake. I'm not going to make it in the future. I'm going to educate myself on what I need for the wheelchair, what I need in appointments. That just came with practice, and that's something I like to instill in other people. I like to think of myself as a healthcare consumer rather than a patient, because that implies choice and that implies power and decisions. Within our healthcare system, yes, there's a certain degree of control and lack of control that you have, but like, I like to be prepared to go into all of my appointments with what are my goals, what do I need from this healthcare provider, not to exploit them, but this is what I need, this is the goal. It'll be successful if I get X, Y, and Z from this appointment. And I like to sort of educate people that approach when you're meeting with medical professionals, that you go in sort of aware of what your needs are. Because like I've mentioned many times, like, I know my body better than anyone else. Like, I've had excellent doctors, but at the end of the day, I know my body the best. I know what I need. And, I look to medical professionals to help me in obtaining the things that I do need. So I take a lot of agency, and, like, I think I've done so well because I have figured that role on my own. And that's something that needs to be taught to other people. Like, I'm very outspoken. I'm not afraid to address conflict. I'm not afraid to make others uncomfortable. But, not everyone's hardwired that way, and they might take back seat when they go into a rehabilitation setting.
Brett, as I was listening, thinking about all of the different parts of sort of healing, and as you say, sort of 10 years maturing, and that I was wondering if you would share with us some of the interaction that you had with a psychologist about kind of working through. You and I were talking about sort of the anxiety part and overcoming that, how much how powerful it was to sort of work through some of that, like
Sure.
years after the accident.
Yeah. So I think, again, when it comes to something physical or like a very physical trauma like spinal cord injury, it's easy to focus on, again, the physical mobility aspect of things, the loss of mobility, and recovering from spinal cord injury. The damage of a spinal cord injury is so beyond just the spinal cord. And I think that's important for people to realize that there is a huge mental, emotional, psychological toll that it takes. And it's not just the trauma of the injury itself, but it's adjusting to disability, the grief of losing your body, the grief of losing independence, the grief of identity loss. It is so profound that it's hard to even put into words how much grief you're dealing with. And I was lucky enough to have a psychologist while I was in Lyndhurst. That's something I forget. Not every client is connected to a psychologist while they're at Lyndhurst. I think I'm lucky to have supportive parents who sort of led me there, and really working through the trauma of my injury was a really big deal. I thought, I thought it was brave of me to not cry and to look back and to not think about it. But in the long run, that did have some detrimental impacts on me. I did, for some reason, after 2 years after my injury, I developed anxiety out of nowhere. And ironically, as a psychology student, I didn't believe too much in the physical symptoms of anxiety. I don't know, it's funny for me to say that. And I feel horrible that was my perspective, but it wasn't until I experienced a panic attack myself that I'm like, oh shit, this is real. But the scary thing was the parallel between a panic attack and the physical symptoms of when I had my spinal cord injury. When I was laying on the mat, the numbness, the tingling, the shortness of breath, the tunnel vision, my lungs were impacted. I was only breathing with my diaphragm at that point, and genuinely thought I was dying. I genuinely thought I was dying when I had my spinal cord injury. And yeah, it's scary, but I just remember the first time I had anxiety was in a lecture, and I immediately thought, oh, something's wrong with my neck again. I think the fixation has come undone, and I'm sure this time it's happening again. And just the tingling in my arms was just too real. The breathing, I was hypervigilant about my breathing, and I was so sure I was having another spinal cord injury. And it got to the point where I was having that every single lecture for an entire year. And I just sit through it thinking, oh, I'm going to die alone with strangers, and I'm going to have another spinal cord injury, despite people working through it. And, it took a long time to overcome that was something mental, not physical. It took a year for me to realize that, I wasn't having another spinal cord injury. And, but I'd always tell myself it's real this time. The other times it's fake, but this time it's real. I'm definitely having another spinal cord injury. And that's something I worked through in silence. I think with the stigma around mental health, I think it's important to realize that, the physical symptoms of mental health show up almost the exact same in a spinal cord injury. So that's my experience there. But yeah, just the grief is something I had to work through with my psychologist. And, it's something I work through with my peers as well. So there's just a lot. There's, you're dealing with the grief of yourself, but also the burden you've quote unquote put on your family. I've recovered from this injury so long ago, and I think it's something my family is still coming to terms with. And we joke about it. I'm always like, you need to get over it. And, I have a twin sister who too took it the hardest. I think if our roles were reversed, I'd probably be the same, but it's a trauma that transcends the patient, the person. It impacts the immediate family, the friends. And, not only was I managing my emotions, but I was having to manage my family's emotions as well and their thoughts. And, like I had to remain optimistic and say, oh, I'm going to recover and stuff. And in my head, I knew what my life looked like already. But yeah, there's just a lot of components to it. And, the most support I had, I think getting through things was my nurses in the rehab center. I think they take on so many different roles, because they're working with you in a very intimate, like I wasn't taking care of myself at all at that point, and they were washing me, catheterizing me, you name it, all those things. You become very close, and they develop an attachment, and they provided me that emotional support and teach me how to take care of my body as well. They saw my drive and passion and motivation to heal and to take care of myself. So it just is a dynamic team, and you can't underestimate or undervalue any single component of that team. So yeah, I think it's easy to focus on the physical rehabilitation and healing, when in reality, I think I could have healed sooner or quicker had I addressed the mental, emotional, and psychological components to this injury. And it's lifelong, right? Everything's lifelong when you have an injury like this. It doesn't have to be an injury like spinal cord injury, but it's physical, mental, and emotional. It's something I'll be carrying forward the rest of my life.
Brett spoke of friends and family and sort of along the way and the effects. I've just been privately messaging one of your friends to see if I can prompt her to ask a question or make a comment. So I think she's going to come off mute.
Ooh.
I texted Brett earlier saying that I wouldn't be embarrassing. So I'll try not to be embarrassing. Brett, something like a question that I wanted to ask you, and we've kind of talked about it before, but and every time you say 18 and 10 years ago, I feel much older than I actually am. And I'm sure you feel the same way. But, we've talked about your encounters with the healthcare system in the past and what that looked like. But, post-injury and almost 10 years later, when you encounter the healthcare system or, trainees, what's that experience like? And what sort of advice do you have? Just thinking about, things that we've shared recently.
It's interesting. I've done really well the last 4 years. I haven't had to, well, because of COVID and everything, things were sort of backlogged, but I haven't entered the system too frequently. I did have an elbow infection last summer, and I think a lot has changed. I've been to many different hospitals in Edmonton, Toronto, Kingston, Ottawa, and I think a lot has changed. I know a lot of these programs like kinesiology, physio, med school, they're doing better in acknowledging the medical and social model of disability, just from my friends who've gone through school, and they're like, oh, I never thought about disability from this point. But I personally think that things are starting to change. I think that healthcare professionals are taking different critical lenses to their bedside, I guess, at the hospital. But I think a lot of positive changes happen from that, but also laws, having the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act on customer service and accessibility. I think Ontario as a province has done really well in trying to address disability issues and trying to improve disability etiquette. But I think, again, it all just comes down to that human component and, bringing out the humanity in the patient and seeing them beyond their body, I think, is probably the most important thing.
Val, did you want to go ahead?
Thank you. Hi, Brett. I'm Valerie Cooper. I'm a hospice palliative care nurse practitioner, and I'm also an assessor and provider for medical assistance in dying. Mm-hmm. And there's been quite a lot of discussion recently, but since the legislation passed for me almost 7 years ago, about the implications this has on the disability community within Canada. I'm wondering whether you might speak to, if you feel comfortable, your own views or views of peers who identify as disabled as far as access to medical assistance in dying, and whether that was something that ever crossed your path, especially in the context of your mental health concerns that you identified.
Sure. So I think obviously it's a very controversial issue. From my standpoint personally, that is a healthcare option that I would like to have access to in the future. Just knowing my body, I deal with chronic pain, like the life of a quadriplegic is challenging, and I'm terrified of what my future looks like when I'm aging upwards to 80 with my chronic pain. It's something, I've used for to manage that pain. And I'm terrified of the day when I don't have that mobility or independence to engage in sport as that distraction. Not that chronic pain is, a criteria for the only criteria for me for me, but that is, I want to have a dignified death. I don't want to be living out into my 80s and 90s with bed sores, chronic pain, immobility, bladder, bowel, kidney issues. So I think it's a very individual decision. It's a decision that I want to have access to personally, because I see myself as a healthcare consumer. I have had to live a very medicalized life, and it's just a reality of aging with disability for me. That's my belief in having access to that. But I also understand if you don't have the support, if you don't have the self-advocacy skills, how this can become an issue. And if the decisions being made around whether or not they have access to supports in the community, that's where it gets tricky, because I am able to take care of myself independently. I don't rely on community supports. I know there's discussions around people, I guess, being motivated towards MAID because they aren't getting the supports they need in the community, or it's not meeting the needs they need, or they feel that they're a burden to their families. It's a very nuanced discussion, and it's something I can only speak to for my own opinion and what I want for myself, but I respect people's decisions to whether they agree with it or not. I see both sides, but I really have only looked into it from like a physical side of it's like an irremediable condition that's like sort of physical in nature, but it's something
I appreciate
believe in
those
as well.
comments and also the nuances, and obviously it being an individual choice. Just one sort of follow-up question: was it something? I know when you had your acute injury, that this was not an option for you, but could you speak to the idea of sort of adjustment disorder and whether getting used to and coming to terms with what had happened to you, whether that ever crossed your mind?
Nope. Personally, for some reason, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a Paralympic athlete, even though I couldn't move anything below my arms. Is just the way, people are hardwired differently. And from the very beginning, I never had suicidal thoughts. I never had thoughts about killing myself. It was more just, well, what the hell is my life going to look like? And I hope it's not too stressful in my family. But, I had enough optimism that I knew there was something worth living for still. I didn't know what at the time. And, it's forayed into so many different things. But yeah, I could see, I can say I did have a friend that I went through rehab with, and he did opt for MAID. I don't know the context. It was not too long ago. I don't want to get into sort of his story, but, he went the opposite direction of me, and he was very adamant after 6 years that this was his plan. I provided peer support, emotional support to him. We talked through it, and it really opened my eyes to sort of seeing that as another like a health consumer choice. It's a topic among people with spinal cord injuries. I know a couple from the UK, and I wouldn't say that it's not. It's something that is talked about for sure, and it's polarizing, but
yeah, I appreciate your candidacy and the fact that you've identified that for you personally, but that as a group, it's such a dichotomy of opinions and views on it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I respect their decision. they know their body best, they know their circumstance, they know their situation, and some people aren't hardwired to live this lifestyle, and I understand it's not easy. Your body's a full-time job and comes with pain, so yeah.
I was just going to say, when it comes to MAID, Valerie, I think a lot, I'm also a C5, C6 quadriplegic. I have, unfortunately for me, like Brett's got a whole lot more going on than I do. For my C5, C6 injury, I came with a lot less injury or a lot less movement than Brett got. And I also have this horrible problem with my chest, but I've had, that may never really factored into my life, but I know of a fellow, a quadriplegic who I met, that's almost 23 years ago when I was at St. Mary's, who did have MAID, but I think his decision was based more on his physical well-being than anything else. And he suffered horribly from chronic bladder issues and he had got this dreaded autonomic dysreflexia all the time. And most of the time when I would meet people like Brett or this particular individual at our so-called spinal cord barbecue, I think that almost every year where he would say most of his thoughts were suicidal is because he was never ever comfortable. And the odd time you'd come across him on the street and he'd say, "It's a good day, Hugh, because I'm not sweaty and I'm warm and things are all good in the summer." But he just seemed to have, he never actually felt well. So I think, in my experience, if you're feeling well and you have a family and you have a good peers, as Brett and I are lucky to have, then and we don't think that way as often, but for some people, I think sometimes the physical stuff is just overwhelming, and it can be overwhelming just depending on what you get when you have your injury.
Yeah. Yeah, no two injuries are alike. You can have the same level, the sensation, mobility, physical, not everyone gets chronic, the neuropathic pain, but that's something that is, has just been horrendous for me, and it's below my waist and difficult to understand. And that alone, the worst part of my spinal cord injury is the chronic pain that it's below my waist. So yeah. And obviously the bladder issues, that's just, the bladder and kidney issues are the biggest concern among all of us. And the AD, the autonomic dysreflexia, can be challenging as well.
We're coming towards the end of our hour. We probably have time left for one more question or comment from anybody. Thanks, Hugh and Val and Brett for that. Brett, any last sort of things that we haven't talked about? I said usually that the hour flies by pretty quick.
Yeah,
we haven't talked about, all the things that we could talk about that we chatted about the other night, which is what we expected. Any last little bits that you wanted to lean into before taking it? Renee.
Hi, Brett.
Hi.
I'm Renee Fitzpatrick. I know you from when you were young. I'm Emer's mum.
Yes.
So I want to thank you because you really spoke in such a gentle way about how you were treated that I think encourages us all to do better, even though you were medicalized in many ways. And I really appreciate that, because I think that does make us do better. We all know we have to do the medical stuff, but we must make sure to do the connecting stuff too. So thanks very, very much.
Thanks for sharing that. yeah, I think that the stronger the sort of the dynamic you can create between the patient and client, I think the more the client or patient is willing to participate or to become more actively involved in their own healthcare. I think if you're able to encourage them in making decisions with them, coming to conclusions with them, that they, it might motivate them to become more active in their own healthcare. That's something I promote in people just from speaking with peers. But I guess in parting, I think the biggest takeaway I'd like to share is not limiting people to their diagnosis or what's stereotypically thought of, what outcomes are, I guess, associated with their diagnosis. Like, I'm speaking specifically spinal cord injury. It's so easy to get fixated on the level of where the damage has taken place, but not putting each client into like a cookie cutter fit of your C5, you'll be doing X, Y, and Z, and making them aware of what they're capable of and connecting them with people who've gone beyond that is important. And I guess just hearing what their goals are, and again, being realistic. I don't believe in false optimism. I don't believe in pessimism. I just believe in honesty and practical advice that comes along with encouragement. I think that's my parting advice there. I was someone who was built to take not harsh, but just the truth. I'm someone who's built to hear the truth, and I can handle it. And I think doctors and healthcare professionals can sort of tell who's built that way and who might need a little extra support to that. Mm-hmm.
Brett, I'm going to thank you on behalf of all of us. I think there's a lots of thank yous in the chat there.
Yeah.
As you have a look, and Renee, I feel similarly. Just the sort of thoughtful, safe, and brave space that we're trying to create together. And Brett, you led us for this session. Really appreciate it. It just, it's a privilege to always for all of us to come together for these sessions and seeing, all that we do in our days. This take, we try to make that connection, and Renee, as you said, try and do better as best we can tomorrow. Congrats on your job again. Really,
yeah, thanks.
really exciting for you. And just thanks for sharing, everybody. Thanks for asking your questions, for coming. And don't forget, we've got one more session this year on April 19th at the Donald Gordon Center in person. And just reach out to Jennifer Complin, Catherine Donnelly, or myself if you have any questions or can't find the link. We will happily help you out. So everybody have a good night, and thanks for coming. And hope to see some of you in April at the Donald Gordon Center. Okay, bye everybody.
Thanks for having me.